Afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone in the room. My name is Robin Morris. I'm the convener for the Oxford Energy Network, and we're having a few more people joining the call. It seems to be quite a popular talk this afternoon. I have great pleasure in inviting Benjamin Mousseau to come and talk to us. He's from Urbanomy. I keep trying to practice the name. What's interesting is Benjamin's background. I see he's spent 6 years researching in the European Institute for Energy Research, and really with a focus on cities, local communities, industries, and so on. So as a context for the energy transition. I see then you moved out to Singapore for a couple of years and ended up heading up the Centre of Excellence there before moving to London. And I guess that's the point at which your relationship with Oxford started.
Exactly.
What's interesting is that Benjamin's work is in connection with a project we already know quite a bit about here, the Local Energy Oxfordshire project, and the low carbon hubs look at the Eynsham Smart and Fair Futures project. And really it's that detailed review of the potential future community in the Salt Cross Garden Village that we're going to hear about today. So I think without any more to do, I'll just point that you're going to be talking about the energy and mobility rated decisions with a net zero purpose, and I like the purpose behind that. So Benjamin, please, yours.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and we're happy to be with you this afternoon. So my name is Benjamin Mousseau. I've been engaged with Oxfordshire for around 4 years, working with the local authorities, so mainly the County Council, and have been part of several research projects, so the Vehicle to Grid Oxfordshire project, which was led by EDF R&D, and more recently the Living Oxford, and the Local Energy Oxfordshire, so the LEO. As part of that, I've been working on this net zero Salt Cross Garden Village study. I'm going to introduce a little bit this Urbanomy, which is not easy to pronounce, but once you get used to it, it's not so difficult. So basically, we are a subsidiary of the EDF Group. So we've been born from the R&D of EDF. So the R&D is more than 2,000 researchers across the world. So we've been working on this topic of net zero communities, smart cities, and smart local energy system for many years. We've been incubated at Urbanomy within the EDF Pulse Venture, and we've been created beginning of 2020. So it's been almost 2 years that we have developed this spin-off to support real estate developers and local authorities in their route to net zero. So our approach is basically not to focus only on energy, but to look at all the sectors, to have an integrated vision, to have a human-centric approach. So we all heard about the smart city that at some point went a bit too much into the technology. So we are convinced that the technology is one piece of the solution, but at the end, community is a group of people living together. So we have to have this human-centric approach. We are technology agnostic because EDF is not a technology provider, so we don't build any heat pumps, any solar PV. So we test biosolutions and we integrate them, we operate them. And with this operator-centric approach, we get some feedback from what happens on the ground. So it means that all these systems, we not just get feedback about how it's theoretically working, but we have operational expertise on this. So I'm going to start with a quote from Sir David Attenborough, which is that the way we humans live on Earth now is sending biodiversity into decline. And this is happening due to bad planning and human error. So we can't really avoid completely human errors because we are human. But we can work on bad planning, and that's why our vision is basically to support Britain achieve net zero through urban and energy planning. Why planning? Because it's the time where the cost of change is the lowest. So basically, the more you get advanced in the process of implementing a system, the more the cost of change will be high, and the more the consequences will be high as well. So that's why we focused on planning for different scales, looking at the spatial aspect of it. So each scale has a different challenge. So at the city or level region, we look at strategies and policies, and going back to districts and blocks. So we are going down to case studies with smart local energy system and trying to integrate also mobility, quality of life, and accessibility. And also, we think that asset managers have also the challenge of reducing their carbon emissions. So we work with portfolio managers, which is a bit less linked to the territory, but it's at the end has a big impact also on the building emission reduction. So some examples of what we do. So we started to work in Singapore. We did a few projects in China as well for local authorities or developers or investors, and then we've been doing some projects in Europe. An example in Berlin, where we worked on the smart local energy system for the Tegel airport, which has been closing recently and will be redeveloped. So we worked on that. We worked in Lyon for the redevelopment of an area in Germany, which is a former industrial estate, and more recently with Oxfordshire. So today, I'm going to talk about this Soul-Crossed Garden Village project, which is a great development in Eynsham, in West Oxfordshire, which is part of the Smart and Fair Futures, which is led by the Low Carbon Hub as part of the LEO project. This project is going to be 2,200 new homes. It's going to be mixed use with also 2 schools, a health center, a large-scale science park, so 40 hectares, and beside the development, there will be also park and ride to support the connection with buses and public transportation on the M14. The ambition of Soul-Crossed Garden Village has been driven by West Oxfordshire District Council through a draft area action plan, which is under review and validation at the moment. The ambition is really to make it a net zero development, so to have low energy use in the building, to maximize the production of local renewables, and as well to have zero fossil fuel burned on site. The objective of the study is then to provide some insights and quantifications to achieve this objective through various options on the local energy system, to provide options to maximize the use of local renewables, and to develop efficient building and mobility solutions, low carbon solutions, and to assess the amount of flexibility that we can get through various assets on the site. The idea is really to look at the whole value chain of energy and mobility at this early stage of the development, to provide all the insights to make sure that the objective of having a net zero development is achieved. So this project, the study is part of the Local Energy Oxfordshire, the LEO project that you might know, so which is led by Scottish and Southern Electricity Network, and among others with Oxfordshire County Council, the University of Oxford, and the Low Carbon Hub. And as part of this project, the Low Carbon Hub has developed the Eynsham Smart and Fair Futures, which is a project to ensure that the objective of these developments are benefiting to the community and to the local environment. So we've been working with this local group led by the Low Carbon Hub, and also with Green Tea, so Eynsham Transition Energy Action, who is leading the local group and is very active in this in the review of the study, and also in the direction given for the study. Now, to go down a bit to the methodology. This is the overview of the methodology that we've used for this project. So if we start from the top left, we have first assessed the future building energy needs. So looking at high efficiency building fabric and trying to get as much as possible from this early stage. So it means that trying to get as low emission, as low consumption and emission as possible from this stage. Then looking at the local PV potential on the rooftop of the buildings, looking at electrification of transport. So looking at how much EVs will be consuming electricity, how much electricity in the garden village. And then I mentioned the park and ride. So we've studied also the park and ride as a separate element, but integrated in the overall evaluation of the energy demand and the emissions. So in the park and ride, we will have as well an EV demand and local PV through solar PV canopies on site. So that's the first stage. Second stage will be to assess various energy hubs. So to cover these needs and to self-consume the energy, we've looked at 3 different scenarios that I will detail later to produce the heat and the electricity for these buildings and electric vehicles. Then from these 3 scenarios, we've integrated all the results to provide a compiled load curve. The idea is to have the overall yearly energy demand and the peak demand to understand what will be the potential impact on the local infrastructure. And then going to flexibility for various assets. So we've assessed the flexibility in buildings through thermal storage and batteries, and also flexibility from the electric vehicles with V1G and V2G. And we've assessed the value of this flexibility to understand how flexibility can reduce the energy costs and potentially bring new revenues. So starting with the description of the methodology on the building energy demand. So as mentioned, we've started with evaluating the building energy need with the definition of various typologies within the area. So as mentioned, there are 2,200 homes with different typologies, so mid-rise and terraced houses, and also several retail, schools, and health centers. Then we've evaluated these energy needs through dynamic thermic simulations and the energy demand with the 3 scenarios that I mentioned earlier with centralized and decentralized solutions. For the electric vehicles, we've assessed first what will be the need for EV charging infrastructure. So how many charge points will we have in this development, and how much energy will this demand require? We've used several load curves from charge points that EDF is operating to assess real values of the EV demand. Then we've simulated the park and ride, so trying to understand how much the electric vehicle demand will be covered by the solar canopy. And finally, we've done an assessment on V1G and V2G to understand how to optimize the charge of electric vehicles and provide new revenues. Talking about flexibility, so we've looked also at flexibility in the buildings using a toolbox that we've used for smart local energy system on several projects. The idea here is to simulate every half an hour how much flexibility we can get from the heat pumps, the thermal storage, and residential batteries, and then quantify this flexibility over arbitrage and various grid services using an optimization tool which is based on the market data in the UK. So I'm going to go through these various steps, presenting you some results. So the results will be evolving as long as the project evolves, because the design of the master plan will be evolving along the project. So what you see is a snapshot at the moment where we've done the simulation, and obviously we continue to work together with the local stakeholders to ensure that the evolution of the planning is going in the right direction. Starting with the buildings, we have 1,595 buildings, mainly residential buildings, so terraced house and few mid-rise. Some offices and specialist offices. So what is a specialist office? We've separated half of the offices within the science park to assign them to a typology which is a little bit more related to labs and high computing with high computing needs. We have two schools, primary and secondary schools, retail buildings, and a health center. So we've worked on trying to get the highest efficiency in the building fabric, so pushing the U values and the efficiency of this building fabric to have the highest standard as possible. We've looked in terms of heating system and domestic hot water system at heat pump and centralized or district heating systems. And for the modeling consideration, we've adapted also to the UK context to understand so how much is domestic hot water used, how much is the lighting and the various appliances used in these various buildings. So AC is only used in offices and in the data center. We used instantaneous domestic hot water, which means that we average over every half an hour. So the need for domestic hot water is not always a whole half an hour. So generally it's 2 to 15 minutes. So we average this, and we take local weather conditions from 2020. We've been aligning our assumptions with the Elementar study, which is a previous study that had been done and conducted for the West Oxford District Council to ensure continuity in the studies and ensuring that as long as we detail the studies for this development, we rely on the same assumptions. So for the energy needs, we've produced a dynamic thermal simulation, which is taking into account the typologies and the form of the various typologies, the various buildings, taking into account the U values and the thermal bridges within these typologies. We've done a simulation every 30 minutes to have a precision, and also we've done that along a whole year to understand also the seasonalities of the energy needs. And we come to these results. So we have on the overall very low thermal needs. So the thermal needs are for space heating and domestic hot water. So for all the typologies, we are below 15 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. We see that this is the result of the very high standard of the building fabric, so it's a good sign. We see that the unregulated electricity is becoming a significant part of the needs, which is something that was not the case with lower standards in the past. So we need now to focus also a bit more on the unregulated electricity and working on the efficiency of this of the appliances. And one result is that we've done a scenario with a data center, which shows that the building needs for the data center is really high compared to the rest. And we've seen the result that it has a strong impact. And we'll explain you also why we've simulated a data center. So going to the scenarios, we've tested 3 energy hub scenarios, one fully decentralized with heat pumps on each buildings, one fully centralized with a district heating of 4th generation, so 65-70 degrees loop, and an ambient loop at 20 degrees with additional water heat pumps on every building to top up the temperature. We have then tested various options. The data center that I was mentioning. So the option of the data center was to test waste heat recovery for data center. So is it worth installing a high computing building in this area to reuse the waste heat? And we've tested also two different control of the heat pumps. The normal one, which is on-off, so the heat pump is running at the optimal power, and one with an inverter, which means that you can ramp up and ramp down the use of the heat pump, which is more efficient, and that we start to see in most, at least of the air water systems. So, short description of each of the scenarios. So the first one is fully decentralized, fairly easy. We have air, water, heat pumps for each of the buildings. So remember that the objective is not to burn any fossil fuel on site. So all gas boilers or solution with gas are not an option. We've simulated also PV on the roof of the buildings. We have thermal storage for domestic hot water and charge points. Second scenario is the centralized one with fourth generation district heating network with two options, one with data center, one without data center. So the data center is able to bring the temperature at around 30 degrees in the network, and then we top up with a heat pump, an air source heat pump, and then we have the same assets for each building with PV and EV charge points. The second option for this district heating is ground source heat pump without the data center. So we take the heat source from the underground, and we add solar thermal to top up the heat in the network. The third scenario is with ambient loop, so low temperature district heating. First one is with the data center, so providing same water at around 30 degrees. And the second option is an ambient loop taking the heat from the underground at around 10 to 15 degrees. So we've taken the assumption of around 12 degrees for this one. And water heat pump to increase the temperature up to around 60 degrees in the buildings for domestic hot water and space heating needs. The outputs show that, so here we see that the scenarios with the data centers are showing a higher energy consumption, which means that the efficiency that we get from getting the waste heat recovery is not enough to cover the over consumption of the data center. Other outputs, we see that the inverter control allows to save 30 to 50% of electricity for the heat pump, so it's quite efficient. The ambient loop with the data center is also proving quite efficient. On the other side, the ambient loop with only the ground source heat, the ground source heat source is not so efficient because 12 degrees is relatively low, so it's relatively similar to the average outside temperature. And then finally, the district heating is showing an overconsumption, so we'll see that later. Basically, the energy needs for this district heating are mainly covering the heat losses. So the needs in the buildings are relatively low. So we don't need a lot of heat because the buildings are fairly well insulated. And it's a large-scale development, so we have a lot of heat losses in the network, which lead to a system that is not efficient and mainly heating for the coverage of the heat losses. So just to show you one example, so we've done the compilation of the load curve for each of the scenarios over the year that allows to show and have the peak demand for the year and the overall building demand. And we have split also these load curves between the various
energy uses and the various typologies. So here in green we have terraced house, here the specialist office, and this one is without the data center, so we see something that is fairly balanced. The specialist office are actually bringing quite a high demand, so it's due to the computing and the AC needs. And for the rest, so that's very normal that we have the terraced house and the residential, which is the main building typology in the area. Moving on to this table where we see the comparison. So a little bit what I explained earlier. So this is the scenario with the district heating. This is the decentralized scenario, and this is the ambient loop one. First results, maybe if we look at on the middle, all the scenarios with data center are the orange one. So we see that data center is really increasing the consumption. It's improving a little bit the seasonal COP, which is the coefficient of performance, readjusted over the whole year. So it's improving the COP, the seasonal COP, but it's not enough to cover the top-up demand for the data center. Now, the district heating system, as we see, is not really efficient due to these heat losses that I mentioned earlier. We see that the ambient loop, in the case where we have the data center, is proving quite a high seasonal COP because of the use of the temperature at 20-30 degrees, which is quite efficient for an ambient loop. And the decentralized scenario with air source, so air water heat pump, is also showing quite good results in this case. So I have, so we've provided some recommendations, but I think I've covered most of them, which is mainly, to push on the efficiency of the buildings, looking also at the building design, because as we are creating very efficient buildings, we are also potentially in the summer creating cooling needs. So there will be an important thing to look at also in the summer. So adding some shading and coverage for the summer. And then we've seen that the scenario 2 is the district heating might be a bit inefficient in this case. The scenario with the ambient loop is quite good. We could look at potentially have several ambient loops instead of one big ambient loop. That could be also efficient. And in terms of the ground source heat pump and the use of geothermal energy, this is a good system. We see that to improve the system, it would be good to re-inject some heat during the summer, to use that during the winter, so to ensure that along the year the temperature on the ground is not decreasing, which would be reducing the efficiency of the system. Moving on to the local generation, so we've looked at rooftop PV for each of the buildings and on the solar canopy for the park and ride. We have the generation over the months and over the year for each of these systems, so both the rooftop and the solar canopy. And we see that we can cover with this system in this setups up to 44% of the energy needs from the buildings. Moving on to the electric vehicles. So we've looked at how much electric vehicle would be charging in Cross Garden Village. We've first looked at how many charge points we would need in the development. So we've looked at the planning documents and how many also public parking spaces would be on the site. We have then a total of 2,600 charge points, which we would assign a certain percentage of the stock of vehicle to be electrified by here 2023, which would be the delivery, or around that date, the delivery of the development. We see that we have taken the future energy scenarios from National Grid, which are the standard scenarios for the forecast. And we've tested two uptakes of electric vehicles, one with 38%, one with 14%. We've created simulation at the beginning without any smart charging, which means that people arrive, they plug, and when they finish charging, then, well, the charge is finished. Or if they depart before the end of the charge, then we cut the charge. We have mainly two peaks, one in the morning, one in the evening, and we have assessed various uses, one for the residential charging and one for the employment charging. So we came up with these four scenarios, so with two penetration of electric vehicles, and whether or not we would implement fast charging on site, so rapid charging, sorry, 50 kilowatts. We have, with this, assessed the daily energy demand and the daily peak for the electric vehicles. So we see that well, the morning peak in this case is the highest. So this is for the use case 1, and we see here that we have well, biggest contribution of the 7 kilowatt, which is the residential. Here employment is mainly going to happen. Well, employment charging will mainly happen in the afternoon peak. So we've done that for sorry, for all the scenarios. They mainly look the same. So the morning peak is the highest in most of the cases. Conclusion for the EV, it's increasing the demand, but not drastically, so around 4 to 8%. It's increasing the peak. It can increase the peak up to 17%, but in the scenarios that is maybe not the most efficient. So it doesn't mean that it would have a negative impact. And then morning peak is the highest. Looking at the park and ride, so that's the latest design of the park and ride that we've studied. The park and ride will be providing 1,000 parking lots with 45 charge points. We've simulated a solar canopy of 500 kilowatt peak, and a local load, which can be a cafe, an amenities, or something that can be installed on the park and ride. We've tested the 4 use cases, the same as what we've had for the EV, to be able to compare that. And we've looked at the net profile, so how much would the PV and the solar canopy cover in terms of both the local load, which is very small, and the EV charge points. We see that in most of the cases, the PV production is higher than the demand. It doesn't mean that it's the case at every half an hour of the day. So at some point we need to import, especially in winter. So the 3 colors are winter, summer, and average. So we see here the need, in some cases, for smart charging, because if we could shift a little bit the load, then we would have the possibility to really self-consume more from the PV and export less. So that's the EV load curves. So now we have done this first step, which is looking at all the assets, finding energy hubs that are providing the most efficiency, the best efficiency in the system, and we've combined that to provide the comparison between the various scenarios. So and we've compared also with the previous study to have a validation. I will come to that. What we see is that in red you have the data center, so you see that it's really increasing the need. So it might be more efficient to actually not develop a data center just for the sake of having waste heat recovery, but maybe rely on the specialist office, which will also have computing and cooling needs for this area. We see again that scenario 1 without the data center and scenario 3 are the most efficient in terms of overall energy demand. We'll see later also in terms of peak demand. And in terms of validation, so we've compared with the previous studies that have been done. We see that in terms of local generation and residential buildings, we are in the same order of magnitude. We've added the back and right local generation, so that's the PV. And in terms of offices, the specialization that we've done with the specialist office, we've taken that from the Peckbrook Science Park data. So we've had access to real data that would allow us to have something that is similar to the reality. And the addition of the EV demand, which is increasing a little bit, but it's not massive either. Moving on to the flexibility. So we've used a tool that is able to assess flexibility every half an hour for the whole year for residential batteries, for the heat pumps plus thermal storage, so with different size of thermal storage. And we'll see also later with V2G, so with the batteries of the electric vehicle. So this tool called the Reflex Toolbox is something that has been developed with a European project that we have adapted for this project. It has been tested on more than 10 smart grid projects, so something that is fairly validated. And we have assessed various flexibility. So the first one is the total potential, so how much we can, at every time, how much power can we ramp up or ramp down. The guaranteed power, which is sustaining an upward or downward flexibility for a certain amount of time. In our case, to be able to compare with something a bit more tangible, we've used a charge of an electric vehicle with a 7 kilowatt charge points during 68 minutes. And finally, the energy in the flexibility in energy, which is basically the amount of energy that you can get when you sustain this flexibility during a certain amount of time. So this is how it looks like. So quite classical. We have the flows of power for each flows of energy for each half an hour, and we are looking at each time how much upwards, downward flexibility we have for the assets that we are testing. We've tested 4 use cases, so baseline, which is without any changes. The first scenario of flexibility is increased heat storage. So we have, instead of having a 50-liter thermal storage in the houses, we've tested with 200 liters. The third one is with a battery, a 3 kilowatt hour battery, residential battery in each of the dwelling. And the last one is combining the heat storage and the battery. First results, as mentioned, with the metrics of the electric vehicle. We see here how much or how many electric vehicle we could charge additionally without changing anything in the system. And we see for the increased heat storage that the increase is not that high. The main reason being that the system, the heat needs and demand are not so big. The heat pumps then are not so big either. So there is not a huge need for heating, both for domestic hot water and for space heating, which means that we can't vary it that much. The batteries, on the contrary, are bringing quite a good amount of flexibility. So we can increase by 142% the amount of charging. So and combining both is obviously also something that is mainly driven by the battery here. Quick overview of the heat map for the flexibility. It's not very readable, but just to give you an idea, so we see here the morning peak and here the increased flexibility for the thermal storage, which is mainly driven by domestic hot water and the morning peak of heating. For the batteries, we have this flexibility here up and down, mainly during the summer at midday, which is driven by the use, self-consumption of solar PV. And we see that basically we don't have the scale very visible here, but we see that the potential is quite high also with the batteries. In terms of figures, so to combine, we have an increase of the absolute potential in energy with the increased thermal storage. For the battery, this is quite high and higher for the downward wanted power. And an interesting one as well, which is the amount of self-consumption that we can have with the battery systems. We can get around 1 gigawatt extra self-consumption for the residential grids. Here, this is an overview of the net demand with the peak, with and without flexibility. Keeping in mind that the flexibility has been studied for the terraced houses, so for most of the residential buildings. So we see that there is a reduction, but we've seen that also the offices and the specialist offices are creating quite a high demand as well. We have not done the flexibility for these buildings. We see that basically the scenario 3 is providing, so with the flexibility, is providing quite a fairly good reduction of the peak, and scenario 1 a little bit less. On the recommendation, so I think I covered that. So batteries in this case are much more efficient than or bringing more flexibility than the increased thermal storage due to the fact that the thermal needs are quite low. Moving on then to the revenue. So we've assessed then how much we could get from this flexibility using an optimization tool that is called GEM, Grid Energy Management, looking at different services. So main services are arbitrage, we stay ahead, and non-energy cost optimization, and DSO and frequency response. So frequency response is very classic. The DSO services, I'm going to describe a little bit because as we are part of Local Energy Oxfordshire, so the LEO project, which is led by SSEN, we have the chance to also work with them to understand what will be the value and what will be the structure of these future services, and how it is described today in LEO by SSEN. It's an availability between 4 and 8 p.m. in the evening, with half an hour slots in which you can provide utilization period, and you get paid by both the availability and the utilization. So we've done the assessment for a 3 month period, so 60 days of availability, with a certain amount of utilization period, and we come to the value of the services, which is 1.25 pound per megawatt per half an hour. I'm going to show you the results for the case 4, which is the most promising in terms of flexibility. We've done the assessment for all of them, but basically the case 4 is combining thermal storage and batteries. So this is the one where we will have the highest revenues. Quick overview of the wholesale price and the energy costs. So obviously the non-energy costs are quite high during the period of the evening peak. Which will come in competition with the DSO services. We'll see that later. And for the frequency response, we've tested 3 values of the services at £4, £6, and £10 per megawatt per hour. The values that we have, we've tested also different market conditions, so one average and one favorable. We see that for the whole development, for each day, we can get, let's say, between 75 and 142 pounds per day for the whole development, which is again looking at the terraced house, so the 1,500 terraced house, so here it shows a little bit the example of the load curve and how we use the flexibility. But coming to the services, so for the DSO services and the frequency revenues, we see the DSO services able to increase a little bit the revenues, where the frequency response in summer and in the favorable conditions are bringing a bit more value, keeping in mind that there are also opportunity costs, because we are not able to bid on the DSO services and do arbitrage at the same time. And the value of the arbitrage during the windows of the DSO services are the highest. So we saw that the non-energy costs are also the highest at this time, which means that we will have a competition between arbitrage and this in front of the meter services. On the recommendations, so we see, here I've summed up a little bit the values per year. So for arbitrage, we can get up to £22,000 per megawatt of flexibility per year, and for the DSO services, we can add up the 4,200. And for frequency response, we can get also 22,000, but this doesn't include the opportunity cost, so it doesn't add up on the overall. Moving on to V1G and V2G, so looking at the flexibility from the electric vehicles, we've used also this same type of optimization model, but adapted to the electric vehicles. This tool has been used to assess 3 use cases below the baseline. First one is V1G, where we shift basically the demand. The second one is V2G mainly to do arbitrage, and the third one is V2G with frequency response and DSO services. We've tested that on all the scenarios. I'm showing here the case 3, which is the most promising, which means we have a high penetration of electric vehicles and rapid charging. So this is where we have the highest potential for flexibility with the batteries of the electric vehicles. We see here the profiles, the typical profiles for V1G. We see that the charging mainly happens during the night, so we shift the need during the day to have it during the night. And for V2G, it's more or less the same, so we have the shift during the night, but we have also charge during the day to use the PV generation. In terms of outputs, so we have here winter and summer case. So we see that the highest costs are in winter, but it also means that we can have higher revenues because the non-energy costs are higher in winter. The case for V1G, we can shift roughly 50% of the cost of charging. And in the case of V2G, in the most favorable cases, we can cover all the charging costs, and have also a small additional revenues that comes on the top of covering the charging costs. This is for arbitrage, and I will show you also for the DSO and frequency response. which are in the same way adding a little bit of revenues, keeping in mind this competition with the opportunity costs. So V1G and V2G are definitely something that can help cover the extra charging costs that we have for the electric vehicles. It's something that is also fairly well tested now, so it's something that is relatively well mature. The point is to aggregate all the charge points and ensure that we can do that smoothly. And I will finish with a few overview slides. I hope you can see. Well, basically, I'm going to explain a bit the conclusions here. So you have here the three scenarios. First one, fully decentralized heat pumps. Second one, district heating. Third one, ambient loop. We can compare here the energy demand and the peak. So you can't read here, but we have the peak. And we start from the left to the right. So the first column is basically the assessment with basic on-off heat pump control. Then moving to the second column, which is the gains we can have by switching to an inverter system. So we see that we can get reduced by 4 or 5% the demand. Then moving to adding the transport, so we add between 4 and 8% in terms of energy consumption. And then moving to the renewables, so when we subtract the renewables that we can self-consume on site, we get the reduction. We see that then we've studied the flexibility for this scenario. So the scenario is the heat pumps, because we've tested the flexibility in the residential buildings on the heat pumps. So on the heat pumps and residential batteries, but it's not something that we could have done with the scenario 2, for example, because we don't have any residential heat pumps. We see that we can reduce the peak by up to 7% and get up to 1 gigawatt-hour self-consumption increase. And then here we have the summaries of the flexibility revenues. So in terms of arbitrage, we can get up to 129 to 142 pounds per day for the buildings. In terms of V2G, we can cover up to 104, 105% of the charging costs. So it means that we have a potential additional revenues. And in terms of DSO and frequency services, it can add up to the revenues of the arbitrage. The frequency response in this case is a bit more beneficial, but the DSO services are also bringing revenues, knowing that this covers also the opportunity costs, which are again in competition with. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice. So that's the overview, and to finish, I will give some overall recommendations for this development. So this development can reach net zero and be net zero with the high building fabric standards that we've discussed. Looking also at the appliances, so we've seen that the unregulated electricity start to have an important share in the building needs. It's possible to increase also the PV generation. We've looked only at the rooftop and the park and ride, but there is room to increase also this local generation. The efficient heat pump system bring a good added value. So looking at inverter control for the heat pump is quite a good idea. Looking at also integrating the urban design and the choice of the typologies and a good building design. So we've seen that, for example, the fact that it's very well insulated can create cooling needs in the summer. So looking at the building design and potentially looking at the integration of the urban design for the district heating solution. We've seen that there is a lot of heat losses. might be also a good way to reduce the heat losses if we maybe optimize the urban design. V1G and V2G, well, we've seen that it can cover the cost. So V1G can cover around half of the cost of the electric vehicle charging, and V2G can cover most of them. The use of the flexibility is, well, there is a potential. We can look at arbitrage first, which is, let's say, an easier way, but to support the local infrastructure, looking at DSO services is also a good idea. The geothermal energy is bringing an additional heat source, but it would be a good idea to look at combining various heat sources. So we've looked at the data center. It's a bit too much. If we don't necessarily go for a big data center, we can use the waste heat from the specialist office, adding some solar thermal, and look at any other heat sources that could top up the temperature of the centralized scenarios. Looking at the energy hub, we've seen that ambient loop can be also a good solution, looking potentially at splitting various ambient loop instead of having one big system. And that's me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You've packed a lot in there. Well-deserved drink. Just to mention that Inga Doherty, Energy Insights Lead from Oxfordshire County Council here as well, is present in the audience. We've only got about half an hour for questions now, which I know is quite often the most exciting part, but you've packed a lot into your talk there. What we'd like to do is to alternate, and first of all, Daniel Sharp, if you're available, could you turn your camera on, please? And we'll put you up on the screen.
I have to give them permission.
Yeah, and I'll allow you to turn your camera on in a second to put your first question.
Could you start with somebody in the room and then just let me...
Okay then. Sorry, do I have a question in the room? Okay, the first question over here, please. I'll just turn, if you don't mind.
So, from what you showed, is the ambient loop the one you're sort of recommending?
So the ambient loop and the decentralized scenario are the two more efficient in terms of overall energy demand. Now, obviously, it's not the only parameter, so you need to look at the costs. You need to look at the feasibility and potentially how beneficial this ambient loop could be. I mentioned also the fact of maybe splitting, having several ambient loop instead of one big system. So in general, ambient loops are very efficient, a good way to have an efficient system. We think that this is one of the options. I'm not saying that it's the only one, and it's obviously going to evolve also along the future discussions.
If you don't mind maximising the Teams window, we can have a first online question. That's it. So, sorry, if you just maximise the screen.
Just let those people in. I can't recommend it.
Yeah. Okay.
Daniel, you're on. If you're
on. Thank you very much. Thank you for the talk. So it takes you right back to the beginning, and this proposal to limit it to terraced housing and medium rise. There aren't any house builders currently operating in Oxfordshire who would do that for market reasons. I just wondered whether, I think Grosvenor is still the builders, they've accepted that as a premise, and what saving you're having in energy consumption terms by doing that.
So, but sorry, I didn't catch the beginning of the question. So,
sorry, the question is that you've chosen to do terraced housing and medium rise.
Yes.
And that is not yet the premise of any house builder in Oxfordshire. They're doing almost entirely the opposite. And I just wondered what savings you're offering by doing that typology.
Yeah, thanks. So this is following the policy documentation and the recommendations from the Area Action Plan. Today we are following these recommendations rather than taking the view of any other consideration. So the idea was really to follow the Area Action Plan.
You don't have any idea of the energy savings by doing that?
By doing more mid-rise and less terraced house?
No, by leaving out detached houses and semi-detached, which is the normal method in this county.
I mean, we haven't done a comparison with this because the idea was to test this system, this setup.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. And another question in the room here, please.
With batteries for residential, do you know what the reduction is? Was that based on like a 3.8 kilowatt hour battery?
Yeah, 3 kilowatt hour.
How would that reduce like or improve self-consumption typically, would you say?
Yeah, so we can improve, we can get one gigawatt additional 1 gigawatt hour, sorry, additional self-consumption. So this one. So in the scenario with battery, so the baseline we have self-consumption of 1.5 gigawatt hour, and we get the rest from the grid. In the case of batteries, we have almost half, so we can increase the self-consumption quite significantly.
Okay, thanks. That's good.
David William, are you available to turn your camera on?
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Hello there.
Hi, David.
Hiya. Yes, so I noted that within your presentation, of course, there were numerous instances around physical modelling of buildings and everything else. But of course, it's been shown that numerous times that as soon as you introduce the people into those buildings, the energy modelling is very often shown to be quite off. You know, from that point of view, I also saw that you don't mention anywhere the uncertainties in any of the calculations around demand generation. What level of uncertainty are you actually working on within this plan?
Yeah, that's true. So I'm not showing the uncertainty here. So we've I don't have the figures in the top of my head right now, but we've tested this. Well, we've tested the energy needs simulation several times and try to match also values from statistical data to be as close as possible to a realistic simulation, knowing that we push a lot the efficiency of the building fabric. So today there are not so many buildings that are actually having this level of efficiency. So it's not easy to be sure that basically the simulation is going to be the reality when this kind of homes are actually built.
But that level of efficiency for the buildings, of course, you know, small changes in people's behaviour are going to make very large amounts of differences. You know, children leaving doors and windows open suddenly becomes important, or old people that want their house warm because they're unhealthy. So from that point of view, you know, it does make a lot of difference. Yeah, no, it does make a lot of difference. I mean, in other studies and other projects, we've done some analysis of how much the behavior can play a role and can go up to 20% and 40% in the worst case scenario. But we have this range of, let's say, 0 to 20% of impact of the behavior that we can't control as such. But obviously, when we see this level of efficiency of the building fabric, if you open the window, then of course you lose quite a lot. So it's important also to have that in mind in terms of education or communication, and trying to ensure that the behavior within this kind of very efficient developments are also integrated by the tenants. And ensuring that basically we don't lose everything through the behavior.
Thanks very much, David. Another question at the back here, please.
Yeah. I have two questions. One is related to the modeling process. So in the demand side, have you taken account into any like a demand response program, peer-to-peer energy trading, that kind of thing? Secondly, related to more like electric grid planning perspective, once you simulate all the superchargers and EVs, what about infrastructure hardening process? Have you encountered any other scenarios, power flickering you need to take care of?
Yeah, thanks for your question. So the first question on demand-side response and peer-to-peer, basically the flexibility study that we've done is looking at demand-side response in a way. So for thermal storage, we are looking at demand-side response from the heat pump charging or discharging the thermal storage at certain time. So that's can be interpreted as demand-side response if you want. The peer-to-peer, we haven't looked at peer-to-peer trading of energy in this context, but we've considered that, for example, the PV from the solar canopy could be reused for the rest of the development, and we've summed up also the whole of the rooftop PV when we've done the calculation of the overall self-consumption, which would basically mean that we allow some kind of peer-to-peer or some kind of collective self-consumption within the development. And the second question on the grid infrastructure, and the objective of the peak demand assessment and the evaluation of the reduction of this peak when going to the various flexibilities that we've tested. The objective of doing this is to understand what would be the reduction in terms of peak to the local grid. So today, the substation within Eynsham with this development would not be necessarily constrained. The calculation that we've done allow to compare the current peak with the future peak, and compare that with the capacity of the substation. And obviously, what we want with this net zero development is also to have a development that has a lower impact on the grid, because we all know that it costs a lot to upgrade a substation, and or any fault on the grid can have high consequences.
Thank you. Can we now turn to Pam online? Now, I know, Pam, that our main focus here is about energy, but you're also talking about the potential positive impact around approach to biodiversity as well.
Well, yes, as I say, I don't know anything much about energy, but looking at the developments in places like Vista, I'm concerned that many of the sectors seem to work independently. And therefore, my question was, to what extent will you be considering the role of vegetation, and particularly perhaps trees, in helping you to achieve net zero for buildings and therefore affecting building demand? And of course, if you don't speak to those involved with biodiversity, you may find that they're planning trees, which will then reduce the efficiency of your solar arrays. So comments on that and the need for some joined up thinking here.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with the benefits of biodiversity. At this stage, we've looked at integrating the sector of mobility and energy. But yeah, in the next steps, definitely there is this component to try to understand the carbon emission, the carbon content of the area as a whole. It's not something that we've done in this study, but yeah, I mean the local authorities and the local groups also have that in mind, and I think it's going to be an important component.
Yeah, so I wasn't really thinking about the amount of carbon stored in the trees, but the fact that trees and green walls can help to cool buildings in summer and therefore reduce air conditioning demand, and the opposite way around in winter. So I was really thinking of that side of things.
Yes, so well, what I mentioned was the fact that these very efficient buildings might
have some cooling needs in the summer need to, well, this lead to the reflection of how to cool down the whole area and not just necessarily the building. So it has a consequence on the design of the buildings, but also on the urban design of the whole area, and trying to reduce urban heat island or create a urban cooling island through vegetation would have definitely an impact.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. We have another question from the room, please.
Hello, thank you so much for coming in to speak. I was just wondering if you know, like how accessible this is, how affordable it is to live here compared to like local housing prices. What, like if we're going to replicate this sort of model for the future of sustainable living and housing, how, because it looks amazing, it's really exciting. But thinking just from what I know of making buildings very efficient in their energy use, it uses up many more materials are used, and it's very expensive, and also like making them carbon zero, this extra use of materials, will the efficiency offset the emissions from those extra materials, and do you know how long that will take? Yeah, just interested in a few things, but mainly about the affordability of it.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. It's a big topic. So first on this development, so half of the development will be affordable homes. So there is already this objective. So it's something that is taken into account. Then the assessment of the flexibility and the potential revenues that we can get from this flexibility is also meant to look at how can we reduce the energy bills. How can we reduce the operational costs of your buildings and potentially get some additional revenues from that could cover some, either the investment or cover or support the local community. And the Smart and Fair Future project that I mentioned as part of the FLEO is also looking at that with the local community, because the objective is to benefit from the whole area and not just from the point of view of this new development.
Can I just pick up, before we go online, just the question about the carbon impact? I think you described trying to avoid fossil fuel use locally, but I've seen Urbanomy talk about urban locations being responsible for 90% of carbon. Mm-hmm. But as we decarbonise the electricity supply, how do you manage that? Is it about peak period when you might need to bring fossil fuel assets on? How do you manage the carbon aspect rather than the energy consumption question?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So I think again, flexibility and having a conscious of the time of use of the electricity is very important. So that's why looking at self-consuming as much as possible what is produced on site, reducing the peak demand at the moment where the price but also the carbon content of the electricity might be the highest. These are the consideration that flexibility can help address. And obviously then you have, in terms of transport as well, so you're going to also have the rest of the people that won't have electric vehicles straight away, they would also use their vehicle. I think that's the point also of the development of the park and ride, which want to reduce the use of car and get as much as possible the public transportation more efficient and more accessible for the local community. So it's on its way, but on the way there is also all this transition, and we need to address that as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. If you don't mind, we'll skip to Lucy Dickinson's question next, because I think that links into the public transport point. So Lucy, if you're around, can you turn your microphone on or camera if you wish to? Okay.
I'm not sure she's still there.
No. Okay. If not, Kevin, are you still wanting to put your question about consumer behaviour and energy consumption?
Yeah. So it's Kevin. What I'm interested in is just how what the basis for the energy calcs are, because I mean, we've got just these kind of total numbers, and I just wondered what the numbers are if one calculated per person. So the average UK person is using something like 6 kilowatt per hour per person, and it would be an interesting kind of exercise to see how one could lower that by a very comprehensive analysis of, you know, how you use waste and where you generate your power and so on. But I just wondered what is the number that you've actually used to calculate these? Have you done it sort of per household or per person, or how do you get to the numbers?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So we've done that per household. So if I come up to the building needs here, so we haven't done it per person. So that's true. It could be a very good metrics to break down per person because it allows to have something that you can compare. We've done here the building needs per dwelling and per square meter. So it's something that is generally used in the building regulations. Today, I mean, when you look at the average energy needs for the buildings, you are much higher than that. You are around 150 or 200, between 150 to 250, depending on the type of dwellings. So it shows that basically already the efficiency of these buildings or per household, because one dwelling is one household basically. This is quite good, and compared to the average today, it's really low. This is the building needs. After that, there is a component when you transfer that into building energy demand, so what you actually use, there is the component of the behavior that Dave was mentioning, and the component of the efficiency of the system, which are the three scenarios that we've tested later. So sorry, it's a bit a complex answer for a simple question. The simple answer would be providing the data per person would be a good one. What we've done is we've looked at per dwelling for the energy needs and comparing that with the current regulation.
Yeah, my concern is just that it would be interesting to have a carrot that actually encourage people to drive their energy consumption down, rather than the other way, which is to say we will provide you with all the energy you need, which is essentially your scenario, and you try and make that as efficient as possible, but there's no penalty, if you like, apart from financial, for the people to use whatever energy they want. Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, that's then it can go through several ways, either in really engaging with the local community to understand, okay, what is your consumption? So that's what smart metering or understanding your consumption every day can help. You can have also some schemes, some community schemes that allow you to self-consume as much as possible what is produced on site. So providing some communication and visualization of this self-consumption is also a good way to engage people. And on the other side, so let's say on the stick side, the price of energy are not going to be necessarily cheaper in the future. So we can also think that it could be also a good way to incentivize people to consume as much as possible the local renewables and reduce also their overall energy demand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that question. Lucy, if you just rejoined us, we'll come to you in a second. Just one observation is sometimes you can actually keep some of the value of community energy within a community, and that can be a motivator and a driver on its own, even if you don't reduce energy consumption.
Yeah, definitely.
So Lucy, thanks for coming back. Perhaps you'd like to put your question now.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was just kind of interested. Obviously, you've got this description of it being zero carbon on site, and I realise that you know the garden village themselves don't necessarily have that much control over the rest of the stuff that happens in West Oxfordshire. But I think a lot of people would be concerned locally that the idea of having a huge park and ride on the site actually is just encouraging people to drive and park there and then take the bus, and that it might end up with the traffic on the A40 just getting larger and larger, and that doesn't actually seem to be a genuinely low carbon solution in the way that a train or some other kind of, you know, transport would be.
Yeah, so I hope I've understood the whole question. There was a moment where it cut, but on the park and ride, yeah, you can see that this way, or you can see that the other way, so that the park and ride is also a solution to cut or shorten the car trip of these the people that well can't have any other solution maybe to travel. So basically, instead of doing the whole trip from their place to Oxford by car, then basically just a short amount is done by car, and then the rest, thanks to the park and ride, is done with public transportation. I mean, that's the question of public transportation in low density area is not an easy one, but obviously, yeah, park and ride, I think, is thought in this development as a way to reduce the congestion and the use of car on the way to Oxford.
Okay.
Inga, do you have any comments to add about what next, perhaps? Sorry to put you in general. I'm not putting you on the spot about that.
Thank you. I think Benjamin's done a great job covering, and I think some of the things that are really coming out through this is helping to. This is very much the evidence base that we're hoping that helps support that net zero development. And the really key bit, the really interesting bit, I think that's come into this was the community involvement and helping shape some of the inputs that we are. Shape quite a large proportion of the inputs that get into the model, and the aspiration is that the community group not just to have the benefits for the development itself, but for the wider community. So some of the drive behind trying to understand the benefits and the flexibility was around what sort of income are you likely to generate? Does that help support sort of long-term stewardship, or long-term perhaps community model to manage the energy within the village? So I think it's just a really interesting way of looking at something, hopefully in the whole, rather than just as a new development that's getting added into an area. So it'll be really interesting to see where the next steps take us. And the community group who are in the room today, but I hope some of them are actually online, are looking at taking that whole wider energy planning out into the wider area. So it'll be really interesting to see how that all dovetails in together. This is one part of that.
Okay, do you have any final comments you'd like to make? Thank you very much for a very comprehensive tour, but given the number of comments you've had, are there other ways you would want to show your outputs maybe to people who are less specialist in the energy field?
Well, I think I would like to thank you first for the invitation. Thanks a lot for everyone for the very good questions. And in the conclusion would be that the route to net zero has to be taken in an integrated way. So looking at all the sectors together. So we had the question also about biodiversity and greenery. So it's a very important one. Looking at the benefit for the community as well. It's very important. And as Inga was mentioning, how this would support the whole area and the whole Oxfordshire and the whole of the UK's decarbonisation. So there are many garden villages projects across Oxfordshire and the UK. If we can make here an exemplar development and an exemplar showing that exemplar solutions can be replicated
across the UK and across any of these kind of developments, that would be also a very good, very good added value for the route to net zero.
Yes, we still need the affordability test as well alongside all of that.
Yeah,
exactly. That's not an argument that stands just in this particular development.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, well, can we just join again and say thank you very much again? I'm just going to do a quick advert now, if you don't mind, so I'll swap over with you. So thank you all very much for joining us online and in person today. Next week, we will have a shift in the focus from the built environment. We've had a few talks looking at energy efficiency, energy sufficiency, and a development of a community now. But next week, we're going to hear from Mike Mason, looking at green ammonia, and that really is an energy storage, energy vector transport solution to see what the latest developments are. And that, as usual, please register for that, whether you're attending in person here or online. And again, as ever, please sign up to receive our newsletter. So thank you very much all for joining us and have a good evening.
Thank you.